You take a seed, you plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth. Hey!
Spanning the globe to bring you the latest developments in medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. It's time for the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville. Now, here's your host, Russ Belville.
Good day, tokers and tokettes and non-toking lovers of liberty. It is Wednesday, February 28th, 2018, and it's got to be 420 somewhere in the world. Welcome to the program. It's been an exciting week in the world of cannabis. We're going to get you all the latest news in this next 2 hours of live podcasting here from Delta 9 House and Studios in beautiful, legal Portland, Oregon. In the news today, we've got some bad news, unfortunately, when it comes to one of our friends, Alexis Bortel, the 12-year-old girl who was suing the federal government over Schedule 1 marijuana. We'll give you the update on that. Also today in drug war data mining, we've got the 2018 state report cards from Americans for Safe Access. They're grading the medical marijuana states on how good or bad their programs may be. And I guess one of the good news parts here is that there's only 4 states that don't have some sort of medical marijuana, so that means we're making a ton of progress. We'll tell you where all the states rank, including my home state here in Oregon. Also on the program, we've got Dr. Mitch Earleywine joining us for our Cannabis Science Monthly, the Cannabis Q&A segment, where now that we're a weekly podcast, we've kind of reoriented this segment to be the top 10 cannabis studies for this month. So you're going to get the top 10 science for the month of February in this week's Cannabis Science segment. So excited to talk to Dr. Mitch today. There's all sorts of interesting things happening when it comes to marijuana research. And then at the end of the program, we'll have time for a radical rant today where I riff a little bit on the lead story in the Cannabis Headline News, the dismissal of this lawsuit over marijuana's Schedule 1 status. And we take a look back about 10, 15 years ago to the decision in the Supreme Court, Raich v. Gonzalez, and the dissenting opinion by Justice Clarence Thomas, which provides some insight into why we continue to fail on this attempt to sue over marijuana's medical status. So that's coming up in hour 1. Then stay tuned for hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. Donald Trump has been reported by Axios to have a secret fantasy of executing drug dealers. We take a look at some of his public pronouncements that make you shiver. But first, let's get to the news.
This is your Cannabis Headline News. Brought to you by MarijuanaMoment.net, the complete source for all your marijuana news in one morning newsletter from Marijuana Majority Founder Tom Angel. Subscribe today for free at MarijuanaMoment.net.
This is your Cannabis Headline News for the week of Wednesday, February 28th, 2018. I'm Russ Belville. A federal district court judge in Manhattan has dismissed a lawsuit challenging marijuana's status under the Controlled Substances Act. Plaintiffs in the case, which argue that cannabis is improperly classified in the most restrictive category of Schedule 1, include former NFL player Marvin Washington and Alexis Bortel, a 12-year-old girl who treats epilepsy with medical marijuana. Attorneys and plaintiffs told Marijuana Moment in advance of oral arguments earlier this month that they were hopeful the case would force the federal government to finally reschedule marijuana. Legalization advocates have long argued that marijuana is improperly classified in Schedule 1, which is supposed to be reserved for drugs with no medical value and a high potential for abuse. But the judge wrote that, quote, even if marijuana has current medical uses, I cannot say that Congress acted irrationally in placing marijuana in Schedule 1, end quote. Marijuana is now legal in 9 states, and 2 U.S. territories could soon join them in ending prohibition. Guam Governor Eddie Calvo, a Republican, included, quote, legalizing the use and sale of recreational marijuana, end quote, in a list of revenue enhancements he sent to lawmakers for consideration on Monday. And lawmakers in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands are holding a series of hearings on a marijuana legalization bill this week. Advocates expect they will decide whether to end cannabis prohibition or refer a ballot question to voters in the coming days. days. The moves to legalize cannabis in Guam and the Mariana Islands in the face of anti-cannabis policy changes from the Trump administration are part of a widespread pushback against federal prohibition laws that many see as outdated. Days after Sessions' enforcement policy change, for example, Vermont enacted a new marijuana legalization law, and 4 or more states are expected to vote on cannabis ballot measures later this year. A prominent Democratic U.S. senator is slamming pharmaceutical companies for opposing marijuana legalization. Quote, "To them, it's competition for chronic pain, and that's outrageous because we don't have the crisis in people who take marijuana for chronic pain having overdose issues," end quote. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York said, continuing, quote, "It's not the same thing. It's not as highly addictive as opioids are. On the federal level, we really need to say it is a legal drug you can access if you need it," end quote, she said. Gillibrand, in an appearance on Good Day New York on Friday morning, was responding to a question about whether marijuana is a gateway drug that leads people to try more dangerous substances. Quote, "I don't see it as a gateway to opioids," she said. "What I see is the opioid industry and the drug companies that manufacture it, some of them in particular, are just trying to sell more drugs that addict patients and addict people across this country," end quote. President Trump often, quote, "leaps into a passionate speech about how drug dealers are as bad as serial killers and should all get the death penalty," end quote, 5 sources told news site Axios. The president, inspired by Singapore and other countries that use capital punishment for drug crimes, quote, "would love to have a law to execute all drug dealers," according to the report. He believes we've, quote, "got to make drug dealers fear for their lives because a more health-focused approach, quote, will never work," end quote. The exclusive by Axios says. Last year, a leaked phone transcript quoted Trump praising Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte's bloody war on drugs, which has led to thousands of extrajudicial killings. Quote, "I just wanted to congratulate you because I am hearing of the unbelievable job on the drug problem," the American president was quoted as saying. Many countries have the problem. We have a problem, but what a great job you are doing, and I just wanted to call and tell you that," end quote, Mr. Trump said. The union that represents professional basketball players thinks they should be able to use medical marijuana without being punished for it by the NBA. Quote, "My own view is that there are substantial signs that support its efficacy and the value that it has for us, especially in pain management," end quote. National Basketball Players Association Executive Director Michelle Roberts said in an interview with SB Nation published on Monday, quote, "We're in talks with the league to see where we can go with it," end quote. While Roberts is optimistic that public policies and league rules on cannabis will be eventually changed, she worries that the anti-legalization position taken by U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions complicates things. Quote, "We have to protect our players from, my words, a crazed attorney general. I don't want my guys being arrested in airports for possession of a cannabinoid by some Fed," end quote.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Looking for the 420 friendliest way to visit beautiful legal Potland, Oregon?
I'm Lori Duckworth, inviting you to come stay with us at Delta 9 House and Studios.
You get your own private room with queen bed and access to our high-speed Wi-Fi, premium entertainment system, and more.
We'll even cook you breakfast. Look us up on Facebook at Delta 9 House.
That's facebook.com/Delta9House. Delta 9 House is booked through Airbnb.com. City of Portland permit number 17-159855.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Young people, many of them that get into heroin, methamphetamines, and a lot of other things, begin not only with marijuana, but by addiction.
Whatever you're smoking, it's not marijuana. Today in the United States, polls regularly show that 3 in 5 Americans support the legalization of adult access to cannabis. Support for medical marijuana regularly approaches and exceeds 9 in 10 Americans. But after 80 years of failed prohibition, the government wants to bring back the worst excesses of the drug war 1980s. That's like totally bogus, you know? It's not tubular. The Marijuana Agenda Free Podcast is available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, SoundCloud, and on our Facebook page at MJ Agenda. Free video archives are available at the Radical Russ channel on YouTube. Help keep this media free by making a donation at paypal.me/radicalruss. Promoting the end of adult cannabis prohibition is easy because we have facts, science, reason, compassion, evidence, truth, and logic on our side. It's even easier when researchers catalog it all for us. Learn how to gather the facts on marijuana use, arrests, seizures, rehabs, drug tests, and more on this edition of Drug War Data Mining.
Today in Drug War Data Mining, we get to take a look at the new report from Americans for Safe Access at safeaccessnow.org. It's their 2018 state report cards where they're judging medical marijuana states. They've been doing this for years now, but they've changed some of the methodology about how they put their grades together. And I think they've done it for the better. I recall doing a rant on this one time when they released their state letter grades, and it turned out that Illinois had the best medical marijuana program, and there's just no possible way that's true. No offense, Illinois, but come on, it's got to be one of the West Coast states. So this new release, I believe, gives us a better look at the medical marijuana states. I'll put the map up on the screen, and you can see the states there shaded by their various grades. And the best thing I think to note about this map is how there are only 4 states that don't get a grade. 46 states have some form of medical marijuana that you can take a look at, even if it's just the CBD only, the cannabidiol and the THCA oil states for extremely limited conditions like childhood epilepsy. You can see those are the blue states. Most of the states in the South and the Midwest that have these medical cannabidiol sort of laws, and then also Utah and Wyoming, all getting an F. Each one of them getting an F because while you are providing some cannabidiol, that doesn't go nearly far enough in helping the patients that can benefit from cannabis. Then there's only one state that's got, the 2 states that got Ds, West Virginia and Louisiana. Louisiana's actually gotten better over the years. It's gone from just a symbolic sort of law to one that actually has some merit. Then we get to the states that are in the Cs. Washington State has gone down in letter grades due to the restrictions that have been placed on its medical marijuana program since the legalization of recreational cannabis. It's down to a C, as is states like North Dakota and Alaska and Pennsylvania, for example. The states in orange are the states that came up with a letter grade of B or better, B to B plus. And that's as good as it gets, is a B plus grade. Americans for Safe Access is giving no state an A grade, not even an A minus. And the way this grade is composed is by a 500-point system. And there's 100 points each in 5 separate categories, which are patient rights and civil protections. There's 100 points there. Access to medicine. You get 100 points in that category. Ease of navigation, like the bureaucracy of it. How easy is it? Can you get your card, right? 100 points there. Functionality. Does the program actually work? You can pass a whole bunch of laws, but if you don't actually have dispensaries to shop at or people growing the cannabis, then the law doesn't work. And finally, consumer safety and provider requirements. How safe is the medicine, right? So 100 points for each of those sections gives you 500 points total, and then you get the percentage based on that. And the highest percentage we see is looking at the state of California, which came in with 89.55%. Just that short of getting the only A grade is the state of California. And I will accede to California having the best medical marijuana program simply for the fact that anybody can get medical marijuana that wants it. It's been entrenched for 20 plus years now. It's by far, for me, this report is valid now that Illinois is not sitting there as the number 1 state, that California is in its rightful place. And number 2, I'm proud to say, is the state of Oregon, coming in at 88.1. Hawaii follows up with an 87.8. Illinois, 87.77. Michigan, 87.74, Ohio, 87.40, and Nevada tied with it, 87.4. And so what that tells us is we've only got 7 states that Americans for Safe Access believes have a medical marijuana program that is worthy of a B plus grade. that shows us there's a lot of room for improvement in these categories. And it's interesting to note that in this report, and it's a lengthy report, every state gets a 2-page breakdown. You can pick any one of the states and they'll show you exactly how it was scored, and it'll tell you where there could be some improvements. So as an example, I'll take our state of Oregon, since we're coming here from Delta 9 Studios in Oregon. Areas for improvement. We got a B+. Americans for Safe Access says, laws passed in 2017 helped Oregon continue to have one of the strongest programs in the country. An average of 3 Oregonians die every week from prescription opioids, so there's still room for growth in using medical cannabis as an option for pain. While Oregon improved testing procedures, it still needs to develop better recall and adverse event reporting protocols. Additionally, Oregon needs to provide patients with additional civil protections, including in the areas of employment, improved protections for housing, and parental rights. So we get a B+. We had 440.5 points out of 500. Now, the areas where we shined in the state of Oregon was in access to medicine and functionality. And this is where I might quibble a little bit. As far as access to medicine, does it allow distribution programs, access to flower, delivery, no sales tax, reasonable number of dispensaries, doesn't require vertical integration, etc. They got a whole bunch of these things listed. We got 90 out of 100. So good score there. We got a 91 out of 100 with functionality. And for this, they include whether or not we have financial hardship fee waivers, which I think we got a 6 out of 7 on that. As far as reasonableness on our purchase limits, and the low score we got, it looks like, was patients can receive legal protections within reasonable time frame of recommendation. And where we ended up with the lowest score was in the patient rights and civil protections. Do we have arrest protections? 40 out of 40. You're not going to get arrested if you have a medical marijuana card. Affirmative defense. Now, this is interesting to me. For affirmative defense, they give us a 15 out of 15. But if I understand our law correctly, we don't have affirmative defense anymore. Parental rights protections, 0 out of 10. We have no parental rights. And as you know from following this show last December, we had to go cover a case where an Oregon woman was fighting for custody of her child because of a legal medical marijuana grow at the site. So yes, 0 out of 10 for parental right protections. DUI protections, 0 out of 5. A DUI protection would, someone who's a registered patient wouldn't be judged to be a DUI automatically because they have metabolites in their system or active THC. Employment protection, 0 out of 5. There's nothing stopping an employer from discriminating against someone who has a medical marijuana card to not hire him, fire him. Even if they pass the drug test, you could still fire them if you knew they had a card. So 0 there for the employment protections. Explicit privacy standards, though, we get a 7 out of 7. And that is because our law does, at least in theory, strongly protect the patient records in that particular medical case. 3 out of 5 for housing protections. Perfect score, 5 out of 5 for no new criminal penalties for patients. 5 out of 5 now for protection for organ transplants. Thanks, a little too late for some folks we know, but still good that nobody else will have to get kicked off the transplant list for the use of medical cannabis. And this other one says a 3 for 3 on reciprocity. And I'm not exactly sure what they're referring to as reciprocity as far as recognizing other states' cards. The state of Oregon doesn't have that. So I hate to have to ding my own state and reduce its score a bit, but I think we've been overgraded on a few of these categories. It is good to know, though, that we're paying attention to the rights. And one other area where I think the report is lacking somewhat is in noting that the state of Oregon, along with, I believe it is New Jersey, have the highest fees for patients that want to get into the medical marijuana program. It's like $200. Now, we do have the discounts for people who are on Social Security, disability, and things like that. But the general fee is $200. And then you got the fee to go to the doctor on top of that. And you've got the grower fee that you've got to pay. They've just overfeed this program to death. And I don't see that recognized anywhere in this grading scale. So I'm happy we got the B+, but I'm not so sure that we deserve the B+. A medical marijuana program could be absolutely fantastic, but if it's got high barriers to entry, all those benefits only accrue to the people who can afford them.
Unbelievable.
Actually, it's quite believable, but we'll keep an eye on this, and I agree. I love ASA for putting this out, and I do think the ratings are better this year. Check out safeaccessnow.org to learn more, learn where your state fell in the rankings. When we come back, we've got Dr. Mitch Earleywine counting down the top 10 cannabis studies for February 2018. Stick around. If you work in the cannabis industry, consume marijuana, or just support freedom, you need to know about breaking policy news that affects you. Marijuana Moment is the daily newsletter that helps you stay on top of all the latest and most important state, federal, and international cannabis developments. Brought to you by longtime legalization activist Tom Angel, Marijuana Moment puts a concise yet comprehensive overview of cannabis news in your inbox early every weekday morning. Wake up to Marijuana Moment and rest assured you'll be ready for the cannabis news that's driving the day. Subscribe now at marijuanamoment.net.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
And let me be clear about marijuana. It is a potentially dangerous gateway drug that frequently leads to the use of harder drugs.
Whatever you're smoking, it's not marijuana. The Marijuana Agenda is a listener-supported independent podcast brought to you by Radical Russ Media, LLC. Subscribe to our VIP feed at mjagenda.com for access to our ad-free podcast segment archive. Make a one-time donation to support the Marijuana Agenda at paypal.me/radicalruss. Now, in the interest of fair and balanced journalism, the Marijuana Agenda presents this anti-drug public service announcement.
Now, I hope you don't think you talk about drugs once and then your kids are safe. You gotta live it. Nancy.
I brought something. You're gonna love it.
Hey, this is Nancy. I can't get to my phone right now, but leave a message and I'll get back to you just as soon as I can. And if this is my son Kevin, don't do drugs. Thank you.
Okay, Nancy, I don't really think that counts as a conversation. Moving on.
Learn how to talk to your kids about drugs at timetotalk.org.
This has been an actual anti-drug public service announcement. To combat this and other drug war hysteria, listen to the Marijuana Agenda every weekday at 3 p.m. Pacific at live.mjagenda.com or download the free podcast at mjagenda.com.
New beginner guitars and banjos are often constructed much better than ones built before your time. Why struggle? Get a new instrument or fix the old one. The trusted professionals at the Fingerboard Extension will evaluate your instrument for free. Repairs are priced for people who work for a living. Stop by the Fingerboard Extension downtown Corvallis at 120 Northwest 2nd Street today or check out its inventory on the web at fingerboardextension.com.
You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
Thought I'd never find your precious blunt cave, did you, Hemp Knight?
Learn more at mjagenda.com.
Hey everybody, it's Russ Belville from the Marijuana Agenda, inviting you to be like me and get your ink done at Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo, Fort Worth's most female-friendly, clean, sterile, awesome tattoo shop. Thomas and his crew are true artists who can design you a custom piece or use a design you bring in. Lucky Horseshoe also offers all styles of tattooing as well as piercings and all-around fun. In the DFW area, stop by Lucky Horseshoe Tattoo and tell them Radical Russ sent you. Trust me, it'll feel awesome.
This is Cannabis Q&A with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. Dr. Earleywine is a professor of psychology at the State University of New York at Albany and author of numerous books and columns on cannabis science, culture, history, and medicine. Email your questions to Dr. Earleywine at 420research@gmail.com or call the Marijuana Agenda message line at 650-LEGAL-MJ. Now, here's your Cannabis Q&A.
Welcome back, everybody, to another edition of Cannabis Science with Dr. Mitch Earleywine. Dr. Mitch, welcome back to the program.
A pleasure to be on the marijuana agenda.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on the agenda as we're now shifting into the, the golden years of my podcasting career. We've become a weekly program, and so now we'll be doing this Cannabis Science as sort of a top 10 rundown of the cannabis science stories for the month. So we'll start here with this month of February, Black History Month as well, and get the top 10, as it were. Let's start with this first one, number 10, which is, one of the most common things we think about when it comes to the use of cannabis for medicinal purposes is people using it for the treatment of their symptoms of cancer. Hell, I remember this going back to the 70s and TV shows making reference of it even. So what is the latest as far as studying the treatment of cancer symptoms with cannabis?
We do have some surprises in the top 10 this month, but I'm glad to say this really isn't one of them. As folks would guess, there are tons of great ways to combat some of the symptoms associated with cannabis or cannabis-related chemotherapy, and these data confirm that sleep problems, pain, nausea, lack of appetite, of course, respond superbly well to the plant, and I'm delighted to say that in this really large sample, quite a few patients basically had to not use any other medications for those symptoms if they had the plant available. I'm really looking forward to making sure that cancer patients have this option in the future.
So it's safe to say the jury has come in when it comes to at least the treatment of cancer symptoms. We're still working on the idea of treating the cancer itself, though. What's the latest in there? Is that having some promise lately?
What's intriguing is we've got really, I think, compelling animal and petri dish level data, but nobody really quite willing to crank it out hardcore once a human person has an actual diagnosable cancer. Tons and tons of fun, reports on folks with the oils that are related to cannabinoids. But the medical system right now has kind of gotten really invested in chemotherapy and things like that. And I think some folks are really afraid. Let me announce publicly that if I should suddenly get, say, some cancer where I feel like the chemotherapy aren't necessarily particularly compelling, I would gladly volunteer to use cannabis in high doses and see how it does.
Yeah, treat the symptoms at least, and then if it helps the cancer itself, all the better. And it's really just frustrating to me because with the lack of scientific rigor on this, it leaves it open to all sorts of claims of cannabis curing all these cancers and all sorts of anecdotes of people having successful treatment, and then fold in that with a little bit of conspiracy theory. Oh, the healthcare industry makes more money treating cancer than curing it, and it just becomes really frustrating. Do you share that ideal there?
This is one that kind of hits sort of home. My dad had colon cancer and really just doesn't have the cardiac function to endure chemotherapy. And I said, Dad, we really don't know if chemotherapy is as great as it's all cracked up to be because nobody doesn't do it. And he said, oh, well, then I won't do it. And let's see what happens. And, he's watching his diet and much more careful about relevant other behaviors, but he's doing fine, and it's 2 years out, and he didn't have any chemo, and I feel like we ought to be able to at least make that choice.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, good luck on that treatment options too. I'm glad to hear it. Number 9 in our top 10 for February is, we discuss a lot of different ailments here on the show. And oftentimes the answer we get back is, well, we just don't have any science on it. We just don't know. We haven't studied it. One of those has been fibromyalgia, which in of itself is somewhat a mystery disease. Could you tell us about the disease itself and what's this latest study telling us regarding cannabis treating that fibromyalgia?
So I have to admit, fibromyalgia is kind of a diagnostic nightmare, but it does have some sort of musculoskeletal pain, some fatigue, but also some mood disturbance. There's a subset of them that really seem to respond well to behavioral treatments for depression, and I got to admit, I don't think those folks really had fibromyalgia. But then there really are a subset of folks who there's there's clearly some kind of immune-related problem, and it's super tough for them. And our buddy Greg Carter has been really outspoken about this, and it's nice to have some new data from 2 hospitals in Israel here. Relatively small sample, but the take-home message is that medical cannabis really did help, both with the pain, some of the sleep disturbance, and then just the chance to have a less fatigued, if you will, experience in your day-to-day life. And I'm optimistic that with the right strains, this could become, in all honesty, the best treatment we have for fibromyalgia, sort of given what's out there.
We're back to those anecdotes again, where I can think of 2 or 3 people I've known who've had that problem and have gotten great relief with cannabis. So hopeful to see more on this. Glad to see this study came across. Number 8 on our top 10 for February of 2018. This was, you mentioned surprises. This one was kind of surprising to me because we tend to get studies that say, marijuana users have short-term attention deficit problems. They can't remember names on a list or whatever tests they might be giving us. But this next study talks about medical cannabis patients and their brain activity. What's the study telling us here? This is quite a surprise to me anyway.
Well, so this is from Stacy Gruber's lab, and I will admit to having quite the heavy crush on her. I mean, she's just such a wonderful researcher and just a stellar, articulate, splendid human being. And this is at the fMRI level, too. So, I mean, in the past, I've kind of ribbed the neuropsyche things because it turns out if a neuropsych assessor sort of thinks you're a cannabis user, you tend to not do as well on the test. But this is literally at the, functional magnetic resonance imaging sort of level here. And she's showing that contrary to previous findings, the medical cannabis users are actually doing better if they have the medical cannabis. I was looking at the means on this too. It's not like these folks are, in the really impaired ranges on any brain activation. She's specifically looking at both the cingulate and the frontal regions, which are sort of the parts of your brain that help you inhibit bad behaviors, like when you get that impulse to yell, motherfucker.
It never happens.
It's just intriguing to see that cannabis would actually help in a situation like that. And in contrast, sort of our legend is that recreational consumers get decrements on these kinds of tasks and this sort of brainwave function. Her data suggests no. In fact, the medical users after 3 months are getting better on this. Now, I do feel like it may be in part that, the medicine is working, that this is essentially helping them. And so, of course, their brains are functioning better. But it does make me a little suspicious that something in the interaction with the experimenters or just the way the experiments have been set up has kind of, worked against cannabis users in the recreational studies. And I'd be eager to see if any of those replicate.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you're talking about this being just medical cannabis patients, you wonder, well, is the cannabis helping their brains, or is the cannabis helping their body so that the pain doesn't rack their brain, right? You're not getting the deficit from the symptom they might be suffering. So yeah, let's get a study on the recreational users. I'm sure I can find some volunteers. Let's get to number. That's right. Let's get to number 7 on our top 10 for February of 2018. Our opponents have opposed medical marijuana for years and years and years with this notion that it was the camel's nose under the tent. Well, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. You let the cancer patient smoke a joint. The next thing you know, there's a pot shop on every corner. They've actually studied this now. Tell us about the results.
Well, I want to emphasize that this is a splendid journal that's really kind of a hardcore bunch of, I hate to say it, anti-legalization folks on their executive board. And yet these data, again, out of Israel, show that the medical cannabis, basically the testimonials that people provide and the way the news coverage works, it really does increase positive attitudes about cannabis more generally, and does look like it could essentially enhance attitudes for recreational cannabis. I'm, of course, delighted to see this, but I am afraid we're going to have to gird our loins, so to speak, when we pass new medical cannabis laws and emphasize that we're not doing so just as a red herring to get a recreational cannabis law across, because there, folks, as we've discussed, who really genuinely need this medically, and we will be happy to, appreciate if recreational attitudes change, but that's not our focus when we're trying to get a medical cannabis law.
Yeah, I always thought that was a silly attack from our opponents, because the defense is, look, if I think everybody should have the right to use cannabis, how would I not think sick people have the right? If I'm one of those, the Venn diagrams are the little circles inside the big circle there. I
exactly.
Of course I would support medical cannabis, but that it would lead to better attitudes among the public, generally speaking, about cannabis is interesting to me, because it was kind of one of the theories as medical cannabis was being developed throughout the early 90s, leading to California's Compassionate Use Act. A lot of people thought that, hey, once people saw that marijuana wasn't this evil demon drug, that it actually had medical purposes, they would start to see the light. They would start to understand it. And gosh, it just seems like this study is telling us that those old hippies from the 90s were right all along. All right.
Love that conclusion.
All right. Finishing up this first segment for our top 10 from February of 2018. I'm not exactly sure what this next study was telling us. It seemed to me to be saying that if you smoke pot a lot, images of pot distract you. Or am I getting this right? Is there such a thing as pot attention deficit disorder?
Well, what does happen, and in fact, there's sort of an attentional bias or a cognitive filter that goes with almost any behavior. So in the early 90s, I had folks define abstract words that could be defined two different ways. I'd say define toast, define shot, define, things that could have been defined as either an alcohol way or a non-alcohol way. And of course, the folks who drank said toast, oh, that's when you clink your glasses. Shot, that's, an ounce and a half of liquor. But non-drinkers said a shot is, something you get at the doctor, and toast is what you eat for breakfast, right? So there's this sort of cognitive bias that goes with almost any behavior. I had shown it with alcohol. Here's one where basically they're saying, look, cannabis users, when there's a cue for cannabis, it definitely gets their attention. And this is a different measure of that, but the attentional bias is this attentional blink, where basically we sort of blink just a little bit differently if we're paying attention to a stimulus than if we're not, in response to a loud noise. And I doubt any experienced cannabis user is going to be surprised, but we basically do have this attentional bias when we're in the neighborhood, shall we say, of a cannabis related cue. It really does suck up our attention.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was staring at the 4-foot bong in the corner, Dr. Mitch. What were you saying? No, no, that's an interesting study. That rounds up the top half of our top 10 list. Stay tuned for hour 2 in Toker Talk Radio. We'll take a look at the next 5, our top 5. It includes a look at roadside saliva tests, homegrown cannabis, the increase in marijuana potency, an interesting study on that. We've got a gateway drug story, and our number 1, hey, 420 is coming up soon. We've got some science on 420. Dr. Mitch, stick with us, and we'll be back in hour 2 to finish out our top 10 in cannabis science for February of 2018.
This episode was produced as part of the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville, the daily news and interview podcast covering the world of medical cannabis, adult marijuana, industrial hemp, and spiritual ganja. MJAgenda.com.
The Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville is brought to you by Cannabis Kamikaze, a professional licensed producer from Canada producing 3 pounds per light. Follow Cannabis Kamikaze on Twitter at Cannabis Kamikaze. That's at Cannabis, Kamikaze. Cannabis Kamikaze.
You're not high. You're listening to the Marijuana Agenda with Russ Belville.
What's to keep somebody from getting all potted up on weed and then getting behind the wheel?
Okay, maybe you're a little high.
This November, whether you see the words medical marijuana on your ballot or not, the issue is there. From the halls of Congress to your state capitol or city hall, Politicians are already making decisions on medical marijuana policy on your behalf. This election, make sure they are representing you. Every vote is a vote for medical marijuana.
Visit votemedicalmarijuana.org today. Health Cannabinoid, your ACMPR experts. Consultation services for medical cannabis. Visit healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. That's www.healthcannabinoid.com or call 1-800-906-1383. Health Cannabinoid.
Total war against public enemy number one.
10 federal criminal penalties for up to 1 ounce of marijuana.
Marijuana is probably the most dangerous drug.
Just say no. Legalization is just another word for surrender.
I experimented with marijuana and didn't inhale.
This is not medicine. This is a Cheech and Chong show. Encourage people to use less drugs.
I am ill. That was the point.
I think it would be a mistake to legalize.
Negative reports coming out of Colorado.
People don't smoke marijuana.
Radical Rant.
So I reported on how the lawsuit involving Marvin Washington and Alexis Bortel, the 12-year-old girl who's gone 3 years seizure-free thanks to her use of medical cannabis, that lawsuit's been dismissed. The federal district court judge in Manhattan dismissed it. And here's some of the reasoning behind the judge's dismissal. He says that the advocates have, quote, failed to exhaust their administrative remedies to alter cannabis's legal status. And the judge is saying that the people that want to see the Schedule I status changed need to go through the administration and the Congress instead of the courts. Everybody always punts it back to the other branch. The Congress will say, well, we can't do anything because the executive branch controls that. And the executive says, oh, the courts say, oh, check to Congress. And nobody can seem to change this ridiculous law. It continues to say, quote, plaintiff's claim is an administrative one, not one premised on the Constitution. And it is best understood as a collateral attack on the various administrative determinations not to reclassify marijuana into a different drug schedule, end quote. Now, you can read along. This is on marijuanamoment.net. He's got a great story on it. The title is Federal Judge Dismisses Marijuana Lawsuit. Continuing in this, quote, it is clear that Congress had a rational basis for classifying marijuana in Schedule I, and executive officials in different administrations have consistently retained its placement there. Even if marijuana has current medical uses, I cannot say that Congress acted irrationally in placing marijuana in Schedule I, end quote. Now, if I'm understanding this correctly, and you know, I'm no lawyer. I'm not even a college graduate. I might be completely wrong here, but is this decision just not saying, look, even if marijuana is medical now and everybody knows it's medical now, they didn't know it was medical then. So when they made the rule then, they didn't act irrationally. Is that what we're getting out of this? Because they made the mistake way back in the 70s when that could be a rational mistake to make. And since they haven't changed it since then, they haven't recognized that was a mistake. The fact that it is a mistake now doesn't give me, the judge, the power to correct the mistake. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm misreading the plain wording here. But Tom Angel, writing in a Marijuana Moment, continues to write, saying that the judge, observers say, seemed moved by anecdotes about the medical uses of cannabis, does not reject marijuana's medical benefit. Really, this is a decision of him saying, I can't say the decision they made back then was wrong because we know it's wrong now, because it wasn't wrong then, and I can't overturn what they did then. Again, if I'm misreading that, let me know. But here's the lengthy quote from the judge's decision, not dismissing the fact that we all know, and most states know now, there's a medical benefit in cannabis. The judge writes, quote, I emphasize that this decision is not on the merits of the plaintiff's claim. Plaintiff's amended complaint, which I must accept as true for the purpose of this motion, claims that the use of medical marijuana has, quite literally, saved their lives. One plaintiff in this case, Alexis Bortel, suffers from intractable epilepsy, a severe seizure disorder that once caused her to experience multiple seizures every day. After years of searching for viable treatment options, Alexis began using medical marijuana. Since then, she has gone nearly 3 years without a single seizure. Jagger Cote, another plaintiff in the case, suffers from a rare congenital disease known as Lee's disease, which kills approximately 95% of those afflicted before they reach the age of 4. After turning to medical marijuana, Jagger's life has been extended by 2 years, and his pain has become manageable. I highlight plaintiff's experience to emphasize that this decision should not be understood as a factual finding that marijuana lacks any medical use in the United States, for the authority to make that determination is vested in the administrative process, end quote. That's the court, a federal court, recognizing right there in front of my eyes, yep, these kids are alive because of their medical use of cannabis. But what am I going to do? I can't solve it. Not up to me. I don't have the power. It's in the administrative process. You have to go to Congress. And we are going to Congress, and we may very well make this change through Congress. But every time this issue comes up, I keep looking for 2 words in any of the pleadings. I'm just looking for 2 words, and I'm looking for a consistency in this Constitution of ours. And I keep waiting for plaintiffs, and maybe I've missed it. Again, I'm human. I could be flawed. I may have missed this in their pleadings. But I'm looking for 2 words, and that is Ninth Amendment. I still, it blows my mind that we are not attacking this as a simple, fundamental, inalienable right that supersedes the Commerce Clause, that supersedes all the excuses. How crazy, upside down, bizarro, Kafkaesque world have we gotten into where a judge can sit there and say, look, I can see the medical benefit. These 2 kids are alive thanks to the medical benefit of cannabis. There's 46 states that recognize some sort of medical benefit in cannabis, and the law says that cannabis has no accepted medical use in the United States, and I can't say that's wrong because even though you and me and 46 states in the entire goddamn world can see that this is a medicine, Congress doesn't. Congress doesn't, and so that's why it has to stay the way it is. You have to go to Congress. You have to convince Congress. Well, of course, we know the Congress is bought and sold. The Congress is owned, lock, stock, and barrel. Bad choice of terms for these last couple of weeks. My apologies. That Congress is owned by pharmaceutical companies and other sorts of lobbyists. Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York, often floated as a possible 2020 presidential contender, has called him out by name, said Big Pharma, you see medical cannabis as a competition for your chronic pain patients, and we don't have a crisis of overdose with medical cannabis. In fact, we see the opposite. We see fewer opioid overdoses in the states that have access to medical cannabis. So it's frustrating to me that every time this comes up, we aren't going for the jugular for this Ninth Amendment solution. You know, I've talked about this before, how we need to learn from other movements that's been successful. And the most successful movement, I think, in the late 20th century has to be the gay rights movement. From going from 2006, when you had, they were like 30 for 30, putting into state constitutions a ban on gay marriage. And in 10 years, it became federally legal. It became recognized as a constitutional right. And learning about that movement and how it took place, there was a lot of divergence in thought about how to go about it. And one side of the gay rights movement said we should go through Congress. We need to pass laws. We need to pass civil rights laws like the Civil Rights Act and pass these laws that say you can have same-sex marriages. And another side, led by David Boies, one of the attorneys from Bush v. Gore, argued that no, the right to be married is right there in the Constitution. It's an equal protection issue. You already have a right, and it's being transgressed. And I believe that's what we've got right here in the case of cannabis prohibition. And I appreciate Marvin and Alexis and everybody who's going to trial on this, pushing the idea that this is a medicine, it has medical use. But the genius of Harry J. Anslinger and these international treaties and the genius of Nixon and the Controlled Substances Act is beginning with the premise that the government has the right to control what you do with your body in the first place, that it has the right to control substances. And folks, it's not a controlled substance. It's people who are controlled from using that substance. Let's understand this. Substances by themselves don't need any control. A bottle of pills by itself is a bottle of pills. It's just sitting there. It's when people get involved that we try to control their access to that. We're controlling people. So this Controlled Substances Act and the international treaties are so intricately written up with such legalese and bureaucratic jargon that it makes it so that this judge, in making a decision which you'd think from common sense point of view makes no sense whatsoever, makes perfect legal sense. This has been attacked numerous times. Normal started this in the 70s. ASA jumped in on this. Hemp Industries Association, they've all tried to attack this. You can't call marijuana Schedule 1 because, duh, it has medical use. You can't call marijuana Schedule 1 because, duh, it doesn't kill anybody. There is no duh clause in the Constitution that allows you. There ought to be. Wouldn't that be nice? But there is no duh clause in the Constitution that gets you to just change a law based on common sense. The way it's written, Congress has the right to determine, and through its laws has the right to control substances, and then the executive branch through the DEA has the right to place those things into certain schedules and certain substances. And they only need to show that they have that they've taken a look at the evidence and made a judgment on it. And there's nothing that penalizes them for their judgment being wrong. There's nothing that says, no, this has to be right and validated by science. No, they can just say, hey, we looked at the evidence and marijuana is harmful and it doesn't help anybody medically. Next. What do you mean it doesn't help anybody medically? Well, there's no FDA trials. There's no studies. Well, yeah, because it's Schedule 1. We can't do any trials or studies. Yep, exactly. There's no studies, so it's not medicine. Next. Every time we attack this, every single time, this is the way it goes. So I get frustrated because, to me, I feel like David Boies here, and I'm looking at the situation going, how is it we don't already have this right to cannabis? Because the founding of our country, when we decided, and by we, I mean white guys that owned land, when we decided we were going to break off from Britain, we wrote this declaration. And it said that we believe that all men are created equal, at least if they're white and they own land and they're male. And we also believe that people have these inalienable rights that were granted by their creator. That among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Among these, the two most critical words of that sentence, among these, that tells us that there are lots and lots of inalienable rights. There's a whole bunch of them. And among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we didn't even start this country until we had declared that as a people, we agreed that our creator endowed us with inalienable rights. They don't come from a king. They don't come from your bloodline. They don't come from your allegiance to any particular creed or religion. That you just being created, however it happened, whoever did it, just the act of being created endowed within you as a sentient being, certain inalienable rights. And among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so we said, all right, let's start a country. And we'll start a country. We'll put together a constitution that recognizes this is why we're a country. And in doing so, we wrote this constitution. And in the constitution, its preamble said, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, not a perfect union, a more perfect union. We'll keep working on it. establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. We started this Constitution for these reasons. We want justice. We want general welfare. We want to take care of each other. We want to be secure. We want to have freedom. And then those people that wrote that Constitution, a few years later, they said, wait, we should have put some rights in there. We didn't recognize some of these rights. We enumerated what the country should be limited to, the federal government should be limited to. States have certain rights. We better write some of them down. So they wrote down 12 of them. They wrote down 12 articles. Only 10 of them made it to our Bill of Rights, and we'll talk about that some other day. But 10 of them made it to the Bill of Rights, and one of them that I think is so crucial, and I'm stunned that it doesn't get used more often, is the Ninth Amendment. And the Ninth Amendment says, the enumeration in this Constitution of certain rights is not intended to deny or disparage others retained by the people. And Madison and Jefferson and the founders had argued about this point that, look, if we make this Bill of Rights where you say you got the right to free speech, you got the right to religion, you got the right to bear arms, you got the right to not have soldiers in your house, you got the right to not be searched and seized, you got the right to not incriminate yourself, jury trial, civil trial, speedy trial, no cruel and unusual punishment. If we wrote down just that set of rights, what if the government then says, well, that's all the rights you've got? What if they look at the first 8 of the Bill of Rights and they say, well, you already wrote down what the rights are. There's no others. And that's why they put the Ninth Amendment down. They said, hey, we wrote a bunch of rights down, but that don't mean that's all the rights. Others retained by the people. Now, what other rights would be retained by the people? The ones that aren't enumerated must be unenumerated rights, must be inalienable rights. And so why don't we have this inalienable right to grow the same crop that our founding fathers grew? Why do we not have the same natural right that an agrarian society would believe you would have? Like, it would be they couldn't even imagine that you'd have to write that people have the right to farm. That would be like, what? They have the right? I guess you have to write down they have the right to piss too. What? Of course you have the right to farm. So for a country founded by a bunch of agrarian farmers who wrote that we have inalienable rights, we have the right to life, liberty, and pursuing happiness, and that was just among many rights we have that are guaranteed by a Ninth Amendment that says just because we wrote a bunch down doesn't mean that's all you got. How could we not have the right to grow cannabis for ourselves? Now, as you look through the decisions on this, of course, the big case that decided this was Gonzalez v. Raich. This is when Angel Raich sued the federal government. She was a California medical marijuana patient with a brain tumor who was using California cannabis in California soil, in California pots, with California shovels and California water, and never bought or sold cannabis and wasn't giving it or trading it with anyone else. A completely, not even just intrastate, but just intrapersonal, just like she was the only one involved. And the federal government, under the Supreme Court decision, Gonzalez v. Raich said, nope, we can restrict her from growing cannabis, even though it's legal in California, even though it's not interstate, even though it's not commerce, because it could be. That's really what the decision boils down to, is they didn't have to prove that she was growing it to sell it. It's all a theoretical thing. If theoretically she could grow it and sell it on the market, that affects interstate commerce, and therefore we can ban it. Now, Justice Clarence Thomas dissented on this case, and Lord knows, you got to go search far and wide to find a case where me and Clarence Thomas are on the same page, but we are on this one. He wrote in his dissent, June 6, 2005, respondents Diane Monson and Angel Raich use marijuana that has never been bought or sold, that has never crossed state lines, and that has had no demonstrable effect on the national market for marijuana. If Congress can regulate this under the Commerce Clause, then it can regulate virtually anything. And the federal government is no longer one of limited and enumerated powers. End quote. It is not commerce amongst the several states that Article 1 gives Congress the right to regulate. It's neither interstate nor commerce. And folks, I believe the decisions that underscore this are invalid. And the decisions we need to take a look at are the decisions with respect to birth control. Griswold v. Connecticut, which hinged a lot on the Ninth Amendment, an unenumerated right to privacy, and if a state doesn't have the right to ban birth control, even though that would affect the interstate market for birth control, how can they be banning cannabis? Someday, maybe I'll know.
Follow MJ Agenda on Facebook, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and follow MJ Agenda Show on Twitter. Learn more at mjagenda.com.
For everyone here at Delta 9 House and Studios, I'm Radical Russ. Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for Hour 2, Toker Talk Radio. Find more on mjagenda.com. And until next time, take care of each other, Tokers.
You plant it, you grow it, you dry it, you roll it, you smoke it, and it goes down smooth.